Some of us are blessed enough to be raised with a loving mother and father, but for so many of us, that is not the reality. I'm a product of a single parent household, proudly, where my father wasn't around to see my first step, teach me how to ride a bike, hear about my first heartbreak. And like so many of us who are not lucky enough or blessed enough or fortunate, whatever term you'd like to use that describes your experience, whatever that enough is, it leaves a lasting impact, right? I remember asking questions about where my dad was and who he was. I never met my dad. I had a picture, I still have it to this day, of my mother and my father getting married in the courthouse. Up until the age of 21, I believe, I had never seen a picture of my dad full frontal. It was only his side profile from their wedding day. Not having a dad around, it affects you in more ways than one. For so many of us, we look to our fathers as a hero. We learn what it's like to tie a tie, how you conduct yourself in public, what it's like to love. Growing up without a dad, it humbles you. I was lucky enough to have other male figures around in my life, my grandfather, my uncles, all who provided an incredibly rich example of what it looks like and means to be a loving, God-fearing man. But at the same time, the absence of your biological father does take a pretty significant toll on you, or at least for me, it did. I remember growing up wondering why I wasn't enough, why somebody who saw it necessary to bring me life would also find it necessary to not be in my life. And that has had ripple effects for years to come on the ways in which I view love, the way in which I view relationships, the way I interact with people who I love and care about. It has created a sense of fear and a fear of being unworthy, a fear that somehow if I wasn't good enough, that people would leave. That fear has at times, turned into reality. But by and large, I remember feeling that potentially there was something wrong with me. And of course, when you add the complexity of being a young Black gay man on top of that, and being 7 and 8 and not having a world view just yet, and not fully understanding that who you are is okay, and who you are in terms of being young, Black, and gay is not a direct correlation there was no direct relationship between me being who I am and him leaving. Him leaving was a choice. Him leaving was something that he decided to do for whatever reason, and that's not for me to speak to. But what I can speak to is what it felt like growing up in this body, in this skin, with the knowledge that there was a man out there who chose a life without me, even though he chose to bring me life. There are a lot of people who consider their fathers or absentee fathers as sperm donors. I don't consider my father that. I consider my father a man who had many weaknesses that he couldn't necessarily face head on. And for whatever reason, if you want to talk about family trauma and the pathology of your family, I'm sure he didn't have examples on his own, which I don't believe is an excuse for not being there for your children. But I understand that he did all he knew how to do at the time, and he didn't find it necessary to do anything better. In 2008, thanks to the power of Facebook, I got a text message, or a private message, from a woman with the last name Siegler. Now, mind you, I had stopped looking for my biological family for quite some time. My mother always made it an option for me as to whether or not I would choose to write a letter, choose to begin the process to find my father and find his side of the family. At a certain point, I gave up on that idea. I gave up on the wish and the hope and the dream that one day, like in the movies, we would be someplace, we would lock eyes and be reunited. That reality was just not my reality. And at a certain point, you kind of give up that hope, you give up that dream. Because for me, my mother, my uncle, my grandparents, my sister, my cousins, all those people were enough for me. Those people chose me, and they chose to stay around, and they chose to be a part of my life. And I didn't have to look very far to know that I was loved. And so for me, the search, or the desire to search, ended pretty young. But in 2008, I got a message from from a woman named Barbara Siegler. I'll tell you who she is to me later, to say that she believes that I was her brother. And seeing her picture, we look very much alike. There's no denying the resemblance. And when we started to talk to one another and to ask each other more questions about our family, she asked what my father's name was. And my father's name is Johnny. Her father's name is Johnny. As we started talking about how old her father was, we quickly realized that she wasn't my sister. She had to have been my niece. My father was about 15 or 16 years older than my mother. When I was born, he was around 42, 43. And her father, at that time, was about the same age. And so we realized that her father was a junior. And throughout the conversation, I learned that I had many, many other brothers and sisters that I was never made aware of. I didn't know. Some of them knew of me, but I had no idea that any one of them existed. And she told me on that call that I had a younger brother, and she gave me his number. And I sat in that information for maybe about a day or two, not really sure how to process it, not really sure how it all meant, not really sure that I even wanted to go through with making that connection, because for me, if you knew about me, why didn't you choose to come find me? But I called, and my brother answered the phone, and I believe my first words to him were, "Hi, I'm Richard. I'm your brother." And there was a little bit of shock on his end, but a little bit of he saw it coming. And later on, I came to learn that my father, when he left my mother and went back to the place where they met, which is Philadelphia, he birthed a son, which was my younger brother. And my younger brother had the experience of having my father in his life, but unfortunately in and out of his life. But at least he got to know who he was. And I can't argue or describe to you or talk for him about the pain that must have been like for him to experience having a father in and out. But I learned that same day that I believe January or February 2004, that my father had passed away. And I recall hearing that there might have been a photo or an experience where the majority of his children were around his bedside, but me. Another low blow, another instance where the selfish part of you believes that it must be you. What is it about me? What is it about who I am? What is it about what I represent that causes you or the family who may know about me to not care enough to reach out, to not care enough to find me, to not have the level of desire to want me in their life the way that I at one point wanted so many of them to be in mine? From that day on, I made a promise with my brother to end our family cycle of trauma and rejection, to end the cycle of being present in somebody's life today and being absent the next. I can't say that my siblings and I, on my father's side, have maintained a relationship. The only sibling that I've met in person is my brother, and I love him dearly. We may not talk every day or every month, but when we do speak, it is genuine love and affection and care. He was at my wedding. I drove down to Philadelphia a few weeks after learning that he was my brother. And our first meeting, as awkward as it was in moments, it was refreshing at the same time because there were certain mannerisms that I had that he had. And it was a stark and humble realization because up until that point, I thought I was the only Siegler left. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to be a dad myself. I wanted to carry on that name, but I also wanted to end the cycle where you would have children and leave them at the same time. As a parent now, I try very hard to be the exact opposite of the kind of father that I didn't have, so that my son has stability. He has a level of, he never has to wonder if I love him. He never has to wonder if I'll stay. He never has to wonder if it'll be enough. He never has to wonder why he couldn't keep me around. I've made a commitment, not only to my son, but to myself, to end the cycle of rejection, to end the cycle of abandonment, to where I, knowing what my responsibilities are as a father, to honor them and to be mindful of them and to work at them. Nobody's perfect, but I don't believe that you need to have an example to do better. I think doing better is a choice, and I have made the choice to be there for my son. No one asked me to adopt. He didn't ask to be in our chosen family. Although I believe that he chose us, it is still my responsibility as his father to set an example, to be there, to not abandon him, to never make him wonder if he's enough, to never make him wonder if he did something wrong, to never make him feel like his presence in my life is predicated on how he behaves or who he becomes. That's my responsibility, not his. And that's a lot of weight for a child to carry on their shoulders. And if I have my way, as long as there's breath in my body, he will never have to wonder those things. At the same time, I need to be mindful as a father that my experience with my father is not the experience that he should have or will have with me. That means that I can't try to overcompensate for what I didn't have, because that's my issue. That's my trauma. That's something that I have to deal with. What I can do is make sure that my son grows up in a loving environment. What I can do, what I do have control over, is to make sure that he gets the best that I can offer him. And I'm not talking about money. I'm not talking about schools, although those things are important, and thank goodness I'm able to provide those things. What I can ensure is that he grows up to be a person of high moral character, a person who loves and embraces everyone, a person who grows up knowing that they are responsible and accountable for the life that they choose to live. And regardless of the life they choose to live, they are surrounded by and they come from love. So, with this, here is my open letter to my son.